evening, everyone. It's good to see so many people come tonight in the inclement weather at the moment. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the nexus between pharmaceutical and heroin abuse. I'm a diversion investigator with the Drug Enforcement Administration. And I'm not going to bore you too much with federal hierarchies by any means, but I do like to explain just a little bit about what I do for a living as a diversion investigator. There are no TV shows that depict my job, and let's be honest, most of us get our law enforcement information from TV shows. But as a diversion investigator, basically, I'm one of the two main roles within DEA. The first is the enforcement side of the house. That's our special agents. They're focused on crimes related to street drugs or Schedule I controlled substances. That's when you think of heroin, MDMA, ecstasy, cocaine, actually, well, crack cocaine is a Schedule I. But then the diversion control program, we only focus on crimes related to the legal distribution of legal drugs. And just to kind of give you an idea of how this is split up, there's about 6,000 special agents within DEA across the country and worldwide, and there's only about 600 diversion investigators across the country. So to say it at the least is we have our work cut out for us. As a diversion investigator, I have two main areas of responsibility. One area is the more regulatory side of the house. So basically, I have to do a certain number of inspections of anyone who wants to handle controlled substances legally. That's our manufacturers, distributors, pharmacies, doctors, importers, exporters. They have to abide by certain rules and regulations, and I have to make sure that they're abiding by those rules and regulations. But we also lead criminal investigations. And this is going to be more of our sources of supply. So I'm not generally going after the users on the street. I'm going after the people who are selling the drugs, who are putting the drugs on the street illegally. And I would like to point out that these two things aren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes I may be doing an inspection, say at a pharmacy or a distributor, and you figure out that maybe something's not adding up with the regulatory side of the house, and it turns out there's actual diversion going on, and then it would lead to a criminal investigation. Just to talk a few slides about pharmaceutical trends and statistics. According to the CDC in 2011, drug overdose became the leading cause of injury-related death in the United States, and over half of these deaths there's a pharmaceutical involved. And I do know, at least through 2013 and maybe 2014, I think they have the data now, Wisconsin, this is still true. There's more drug overdoses killing people than car accidents in Wisconsin. This graph, it's a little bit dated. This goes through 2010. But basically, what it illustrates is the amount of prescription narcotic overdose deaths skyrocketed in the 2000s. It outweighed cocaine and heroin combined. I think if we were to see a little bit more up-to-date data, in 2010, 2011, you're going to see that red line of prescriptions actually coming down, and you're going to see the heroin line actually skyrocketing. So there's going to be a nexus that way. I have a graph here in a few slides that's going to actually illustrate that, even though it's a little bit different data. The number of addicted infants that are born has tripled in the last decade to prescription painkillers. The technical term for this is neonatal abstinence syndrome. It's very similar to fetal alcohol syndrome. And basically it can cause complications very much like FAS, including low birth weights, SIDS, and even behavioral and developmental problems later in life. Wisconsin, we have the second highest number of pharmacy robberies in the entire country this year. I think this is kind of baffling and scary. This is only data from January through June, 32 robberies within Wisconsin, and I want to say a good percentage of those were actually in the Milwaukee area. I know they had a slew of pharmacy robberies. They finally caught at least one, maybe two of the gangs that were doing these robberies. The only state that's ahead of us this year is Indiana, interestingly, and I want to say their numbers are somewhere in the 60s. So they have double the amount of pharmacy robberies that we do, even though we're number 2 in the nation. If you Google farming parties, I don't know if anyone's familiar, farming, PH, You'll get a picture that looks like this martini glass over there. Basically, this is where kids take drugs out of their parents' medicine cabinets, grandma's cupboards, whatnot. They bring their pills to a party, they throw them into a bowl, and then they take a handful and hope that something cool happens. It's a terrifying trend that I haven't heard too much of in the last couple years, but I know at least in the earlier 2000s this was very popular. And basically what this slide is meant to be up here for is whether you started taking drugs for a legitimate medical reason or recreationally, the potential for abuse and addiction is huge. And it doesn't matter if it was recreational or if it was for a legitimate reason. You can get addicted to these narcotics so easily. Torrential downpour, I think. Teens and their attitudes, they don't think pills are dangerous. And why is that? This is just my personal opinion, but I think we're a very over-medicated society. We take a pill for everything. There are some pills that are out there that actually are aimed at targeting side effects of other pills. Like, we take pills for everything. And so why are we surprised when we think that our kids taking a pill is not going to be harmful to me? They don't think it's going to be as addictive. They don't think it's going to be as harmful. And the reality is it can be just as harmful, and it could just take one time, taking the wrong combination of something, and then unfortunately you have an overdose death. Marijuana is still the #1 drug of choice amongst our first-time drug users, but prescription pain relievers is #2. And where are they getting these? They're getting their pills generally free from a friend or a relative. And so what does that tell me? That tells me there's a lot of pills laying around that aren't being used legitimately. And so I think it's very important to educate our communities about the take-back programs. I was just talking to the sheriff about the Greene County take-back program. There's likely at least a couple police departments within your area that have take-back boxes for prescription medications that are no longer wanted. And they are going to make sure that they get destroyed in a legal manner and not end up in our water system either. 1 in 15 people who take non-medical prescription pain relievers will try heroin within 10 years, according to a survey taken in 2010. In a similar slide, heroin is part of a larger substance abuse problem. Our prescription opiate painkillers, if you're addicted to painkillers, you're 40 times more likely to get addicted to heroin. And why is that? This whole reason I'm here today is this slide. Well, it's a lot cheaper. Heroin, unfortunately, is a lot cheaper than the pills. Just to kind of give you an idea, an oxycodone 30 milligram tablet, you're usually going to be paying about $1 per milligram on the street. So that's $30 for one tablet. And an addict isn't just taking one tablet a day. They're taking multiple tablets a day. That adds up very quickly. Heroin in some areas where it's more readily available could only cost $5 per hit. Maybe, I've even heard in Milwaukee, $1 a hit for some heroin in the Milwaukee area. It also relieves pain. It's going to create the same kind of high because it's the same opiate receptors in your brain. They don't care if it's a legitimate drug or if it's heroin. All they know is the receptors just want it. They want it now. And the kind of heroin that's available right now on the streets is a lot different than the 1970s. The form that's out there today, it's a lot easier to snort and smoke. So that first-time drug user who's going to use heroin, maybe back in the day they would have been dissuaded because of the stigma attached to shooting up a drug. Now they don't have to do that. They're usually going to end up shooting up the drug because it gets them a better high or a faster high, but you don't have to start out that way. Okay, so this is the graph I was talking about. Kind of a lot going on, but this data comes from our treatment abuse centers here in Wisconsin, so this is specific to Wisconsin. The blue and yellow lines is what I kind of want you guys to keep in mind here. Around 2010, mid-2010 into 2011, you see a switch between the heroin and other opiates, meaning prescription opiates. Mid-2010 is going to play a key role in a couple of slides from now when I talk about the reformulation of OxyContin. So we're going to talk about some of the most common drugs on the street right now as far as pharmaceuticals go. But first, the most important, I think, especially when we're talking about heroin, are opioids. I think it's important to understand how these work when they get into your body. So this next thing I have is just a quick 2-minute video, and I think it does a really good job explaining what opioids do when they enter the body.
Before we can explore your brain on opiates, we need to understand a few things. An opiate is a chemical derived from opium and is the key ingredient in heroin. Those narcotics in your medicine cabinet, codeine, oxycodone, hydrocodone, they're opiate-like, but they are man-made and more commonly referred to as opioids. So how do these chemicals affect the brain? One big way is by exerting powerful pain relief to the rest of the body. Chemicals flood the system and latch onto millions of opiate receptors peppered throughout the body. Think of opiates and the receptors like puzzle pieces. When they bind together, pain signals are dulled, or they go away altogether. If the brain already has opiate receptors, doesn't that mean it can naturally provide pain relief? That's right. Feel-good chemicals like endorphins are natural opiates that dull pain and also give you a rush. The problem with man-made opiates that mimic endorphins, take too many and they can overwhelm the system, give you too much of a rush. That can lead to dependence or abuse. Addiction becomes an even bigger problem because opiates also slow down breathing and heart rate. Mix them with other things that slow down your body, and everything could grind to a halt. In fact, every 19 minutes, someone dies of an accidental prescription drug overdose. Most of the time, it involves an opiate. It's now more common than dying in a car crash. If you want to avoid that fate, don't take more than you're prescribed. Don't use other people's prescriptions. Never mix opiates with alcohol. And maybe try other ways of alleviating your pain, like over-the-counter pain relievers and good old-fashioned exercise.
Okay, so that was Dr. Sanjay Gupta with CNN. That last little part about going for a run if you're in pain, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, especially if you're a terminally ill cancer patient or you have a legitimate injury. But again, we're more worried about the abuse of controlled substances when you don't actually have a prescription for them. So one of the most common and popular drugs still on the market, or on the illegal market, would be our oxycodone immediate release drugs. These are generic forms of oxycodone. There's no protective sealant or anything on the binders to make it harder for it to crush. So this is still sought after quite a bit. And again, 30 milligrams, your 30 milligram oxycodone is gonna be about $30 on the street. Depending on where you are, it could be more like 15. And in some areas, it could be more like $40 or $50 per pill. One oxycodone 30 milligram is about the equivalent of one hit of heroin as far as a high goes. And then this is how you abuse your oxycodone. This is the oxycodone that you can still crush up. This is how they smoke it. It's going to look actually quite a bit like heroin, or some ways that you can smoke heroin. You crush it up, you put it on the foil, you put the heat source underneath the tin foil. And then Oxycontin. So I mentioned the reformulation of Oxycontin. So the oxycodone product we were just looking at, that 30 milligram tablet, what you see is what you get. That 30 milligram tablet, you crush it up, you get 30 milligrams of oxycodone. Oxycontin is a different drug. It's an extended release product. So what that means is a 30 milligram extended release Oxycontin actually has a lot more than just that 30 milligrams in there. Prior to the reformulation, they didn't have any kind of protective coating. They would crush it up, they would smoke it, they would inject it. It was like the #1 drug on the street sought after from our drug addicts. And it caused a heck of a lot of overdose deaths. So Purdue Pharma had to reformulate this, the coating that goes on it. So now you can see the original was just crushed up, reformulated, it's a lot harder to crush up. And then you can also see the reformulated, when you're trying to inject it, it kind of turns into this congealed substance. So it would be a lot harder to inject into your vein. But again, that reformulation happened mid-2010. So remember that graph when we saw opiates and heroin kind of do this switcheroo? I have to imagine that there's a huge, at least I don't think it's just a theory anymore, but a reason why that happened. Oxycodone combination products, you're going to probably know these as like Percocet and Roxyset. This is an oxycodone product that's coupled with either acetaminophen, so Tylenol, or like an Advil substance. Still very addictive. Fentanyl, this was originally created for terminally ill cancer patients. They come in the form of a patch. We see it in the upper corner here. I think that's a lozenge that melts on your tongue. And then I think the scariest form of this drug is a little lollipop. This is here on the corner here. And basically that's for patients who can no longer swallow and or have problems with their skin, so they can't wear the patch. But just imagine if that got in the wrong hands and some kid thought that that was like candy or something. I think that's probably the scariest. But it's a very potent narcotic. And again, it was intended for chronic pain for cancer patients. But it is very sought after on the street. And I've even heard of people chewing on used fentanyl patches in order to get like the remnants out of there, in order to get some sort of high. And just recently in the Madison area, I heard of an overdose happening because someone tried to smoke a patch that someone had previously used. Methadone, this was actually created, I want to say in the World War II era. It was going to be an alternative to morphine. Never really caught on as a popular narcotic though. Not until like the 1960s, late 1960s, 1970s, when our Vietnam vets were coming back from Vietnam. A lot of them were addicted to heroin, and they figured out that methadone was a good way to wean them off the heroin. And that's kind of where our narcotic treatment programs were born. Methadone obviously is used for addiction treatment, but it's also used for pain. In the last 10 to 15 years, physicians are prescribing methadone more for pain these days. But it's a very scary drug, especially if you take more than what's prescribed to you. The reason why it's so scary is, of all of our narcotics, this one has the longest half-life. So basically, you take a methadone pill, you feel the pain, pain relief, but you're not seeing is its effect on your respiration. So that pain relief wears off, someone takes some more of the methadone, and again, they're not noticing the respiration effects, but it keeps layering, that respiration effect keeps layering. You mix it with alcohol, or you go to sleep at night, you've taken too much, and essentially you stop breathing and you die. Hydrocodone, also a semi-synthetic narcotic. I think this is kind of fascinating and scary. The U.S. consumes 99% of the world's hydrocodone. It's a very popular drug, and it's only popular here. Even though we only make up 4.5% of the world's population. Usually this is it could be involved in, say, like a polydrug overdose. Taking too much hydrocodone is not usually going to kill you, but when you take it in combination with other things, it could be very, very dangerous. Just to give you an idea, I actually worked a case against a dentist who ended up cooperating with us. He was ordering drugs to the office and he was eating them all. He admitted to taking 60 to 80 hydrocodone pills per day, and he was still practicing dentistry. Hydrocodone is very popular in Wisconsin, and it has been for the last decade. This, just again, a lot going on the screen, but this data comes from our prescription drug monitoring program. The PDMP is what we also call it, is basically where all of our pharmacies have to report any kind of dispensation that they have done for a controlled substance to a patient in Wisconsin. And so what you'll see over here to, this will be my left or my right, hydrocodone, 440,000 prescriptions for hydrocodone in 3 months in Wisconsin. That's the whole state, but granted, these are legitimate prescriptions, but it's commonly the most prescribed narcotic within our state, and it has been. And then also, I think this is also interesting, the dark green counties, they're showing you total controlled substances per capita. So, you'd maybe expect Milwaukee, Madison, the more populated areas to have a little bit more activity as far as controlled substances. goes, but what's going on up here near the border? There's a lot of counties up there that are getting just as many controlled substances as, say, Milwaukee and Madison areas. I think it's quite interesting. Hydrocodone also comes in a combination product. Again, acetaminophen or Advil. They did federally just change this a little bit last year. They make it a little bit harder to get hydrocodone now. So previously to last year, your doctor could just call the pharmacy and say, hey, patient X needs hydrocodone. That can no longer happen. Now the patient actually has to go to the office and get a hard copy prescription and take it to their pharmacy. And it's a little bit harder to order too. That's more at the pharmacy level, but they are trying to, at least at the federal level, make it a little bit harder to get this drug that the U.S. loves so much. Vicodin's a very common one, Lortab. It's kind of just show you some pills. And just to kind of give you an idea of what you're looking at numbers-wise, if you're ever curious, 7.5 over 300. So 7.5 is the amount of hydrocodone you're getting in that pill, and then 30 milligram, or 300 is actually the acetaminophen, so the Tylenol part of that drug. And I think it's very interesting. Just in January of 2014, the FDA said, well, we need to limit the amount of acetaminophen in this drug. Not the hydrocodone, the acetaminophen, because of its effect on your liver. So I think that's kind of crazy. ADHD medications, especially your school-age, college-age kids, this is highly sought after on the illegal market. Obviously, it's an upper, it's a stimulant. For people who actually have ADHD, it actually calms their brain waves down. For someone who doesn't have ADHD, it's just going to act as a stimulant. I think it was very interesting. I saw a study, I don't know if it was published yet or not, but so there was this research study. They bring in some kids, they give them this test, and they get the test results, and then they bring them back in, and these are all kids that don't have ADHD. They give them some ADHD medication, have them take a similar test, and get the test results. Almost all the subjects of the testing said, oh, well, I definitely did better on the second round. And as it turns out, there was no difference between the test results. So it's like almost a placebo effect that they're having, thinking that they're smarter taking these drugs, when in reality it's not really doing anything for them, other than maybe staying awake at night to study. Suboxone, this is an alternative to methadone. It's a doctor or an office-based prescription. So you don't have to go to the methadone clinic to get Suboxone. A doctor can actually write you a prescription for this. It's used to treat substance abuse addiction. And it helps with withdrawals. This also is seen on the street, sold illegally. Not so much as to get high, more so for someone who can't get their next fix, and they definitely don't want to go through withdrawal. They're going to seek out this Suboxone on the street. Benzodiazepines, you probably have heard of Xanax or Valium, also very abused, sold on the street. Anti-anxiety agents, these are commonly mixed with other drugs too to kind of give you a synergistic effect. Promethazine with codeine, and the pharmacy robberies I mentioned earlier, especially a good number of them in Milwaukee, this was the #1 thing they were stealing, this codeine syrup. And just to kind of give you an idea how that's used, I mean, you could just drink the syrup itself. It's supposed to give you kind of like a high, obviously a heroin-like high. But you see it a lot in like rap videos, music videos. Bieber up there, I'm not really sure what he's thinking about, but they mix it with their favorite kind of soft drink and maybe some Jolly Ranchers, and it's called Sippin' Scissor. That's what that means. Is there's a codeine syrup actually used in that mix there. So as a community member, as a parent, as anyone who maybe comes into contact with some sort of pill and you're like, what is this? Why is this in my child's pocket? There's an app for that. You can figure out what you're looking at. This is very useful at the law enforcement level, and it can also be very useful for your community members. There's this one, I think it was the first one. You can actually just take a picture of what you're looking at, and it's supposed to be able to identify the pills for you. Android has similar ones. Basically, if you go into your app store and do a search for pill identifier, you're going to get multiple options for figuring out what you're looking at as far as pills go. And some helpful internet sites. Drugs.com, I actually use quite a bit at work to figure out what a drug does, what it's prescribed for, maybe some interactions we could have with other drugs. Erowid.com, I don't know if anyone's heard of this. I find it to be equal parts fascinating and terrifying. The reason why, it's an amazing database for all sorts of drugs and chemicals and what they do, what they're made for, what they're supposed to do in the body. Then there's also a user part of this website where people can go and explain what their experiences were with certain drugs. So you could actually do a search. What would it be like if I took a Xanax, an Oxy, and a Soma all at once? Well, you're going to be able to find probably 100 different users' experience of what that high was like. Oh, and you should take this at this point, and it's basically 101 for drug users, so terrifying. But as a parent, again, if you want a resource for what certain drugs do, it's a great resource. And we're not actually taking questions now, but I do want to put my information up here. If anyone has any questions, I'm going to try to stay as late as I can, but I actually need to get back to Madison, so I may not be here for the question and answer part, but that doesn't mean I don't care. So if you have questions, please email me, call me. That's my direct line. Comments, stories, anything like that. I love hearing from the community members. These presentation opportunities are always a highlight of my job. So next is going to be Julie. She's going to talk a little bit more about the heroin abuse.